Let me share something with you that could change your life. But first, let me ask you this. Have you ever watched someone lose interest in you and tried harder, thinking that would change their mind? As if being more available, more patient, more forgiving would somehow reverse their decision to stop choosing you. If that sounds familiar, you're in the right place. This video is for you. Because today we're doing more than talking about rejection. We're learning to harness its power. Sometimes, turning away is more potent than holding on, if you understand how to wield it. In the next minutes, we'll explore 13 transformative strategies to turn rejection into momentum, free of resentment, free of games, by shifting your mental, emotional, and energetic responses. Grounded in Carl Jung's wisdom and refined by real-life breakthroughs, these insights will teach you to detach without losing yourself, to act without reacting, and to reclaim every ounce of energy you've ever poured into someone who didn't appreciate it. Let's dive into strategy 1. Disengagement isn't defeat, it's discipline. When someone pulls away and you compensate with extra time, explanations, or apologies, you inadvertently teach them that your value is negotiable. In reality, setting boundaries honors your worth. Jung reminded us that clinging to what hinders our growth betrays the self we're meant to become. Rather than proving your loyalty to someone who's already walked off stage, choose to step back. Rather than chase, debate, or diminish yourself, simply withdraw your participation. By closing the door on unreciprocated dynamics, you reassert control, not by retracting love, but by limiting access. Consequently, your absence speaks louder than any argument ever could. And that brings us to the second lesson, one that often gets overlooked, but changes everything when embraced. Silence as sovereignty. After you step away, retaliation isn't the next move. Composure is. Choosing quiet isn't a punishment, it's a refusal to barter for respect. Most people expect you to react, to send that late-night message or explode in frustration. Instead, withholding your voice disrupts their sense of control. Silence needs no defense, it's proof of self-respect. You're not dodging the conversation, you're opting out of a dialogue destined to fall on deaf ears. In that stillness, you shift from reactive to resolute, reminding them what it feels like when you decide not to play their game. Now comes the third lesson. Subtle but powerful. You disappear with dignity. Imagine acting as though you've moved on, whether you have or not. People linger in hope when they believe you're still there, refreshing their notifications. The moment you vanish from their radar, something shifts. Confusion replaces guilt. You no longer supply cryptic hints or keep the door ajar. Instead, you remove yourself quietly, letting boredom do the convincing. A sincere smile replaces the practiced facade of someone waiting on a reply. You don't need to prove you're fine, you simply stop showing up. And that's exactly when the fourth lesson begins, one that flips expectations entirely, kindness as a boundary. Most expect drama, an emotional breakdown, or a petty confrontation. But when you remain polite and unflappable, you deny them the satisfaction of fueling your ego. Politeness isn't their gift, it's your armor. Offer courtesy not to draw them back, but to demonstrate that kindness isn't reserved for those who don't earn it. Your restraint confounds them because power often looks like grace under pressure. From that grace comes a deeper shift. The fifth lesson, absence elevates value. Constant availability breeds invisibility. When someone takes for granted that you'll always respond, your presence loses impact. They stop listening, not because you're not worth hearing, but because your presence has become background noise, always there, always reliable, always assumed. So you withdraw, quietly, not out of bitterness but out of clarity. You remove the cushion of easy access. You stop being the emotional safety net for someone who never questioned what it cost you to hold space. In that vacuum, something powerful happens. They experience your absence not as silence, but as a weight, a missing element, a shift in the energy they once depended on but never truly valued. And though they might pretend not to notice, out of pride, denial, or habit, the absence echoes. Because the truth is, people rarely appreciate what remains constant. But once it's gone, the contrast becomes undeniable. You're not pulling away to provoke regret. You're stepping back to restore balance. You're allowing the space you once filled to speak for itself. And if they truly want your presence again, they'll have to meet you differently. No more vague gestures, no more halfway effort. Real presence or none at all. This isn't revenge, it's recalibration. Because every time you give without boundaries, you lower your own value. And every time you step away with intention, you raise it again, not just in their eyes, but in your own. And what follows next might be uncomfortable, but it's necessary. Because the sixth lesson is about seeing clearly what rejection actually reveals. Rejection hurts, but it also uncovers what words often hide. Instead of obsessing over what you could have done differently, start paying attention to how they chose to leave. That's where the truth lives. Did they disappear without explanation? Ghost you when you needed closure? Act indifferent to your pain? That exit wasn't random, it was revealing. People show you everything you need to know by how they handle your vulnerability and how they treat you when there's nothing left to gain. That's their character, unfiltered. Stop replaying the old messages. Stop editing the past trying to make it more palatable. What they said matters less than what they did when things stopped being easy. Rejection doesn't define you unless you let it. When you treat it like information, not identity, everything changes. You stop asking, what was wrong with me? And you start seeing, this is who they were all along. In that clarity, you don't spiral, you stabilize. You no longer collapse trying to protect a version of them that never existed. You stop defending someone who wouldn't even defend you in the end. Their silence, their withdrawal, their disregard, it all becomes evidence. Not of your failure, but of their limitations. And with that clarity comes your next move, the seventh lesson. Redirect pain into purpose. Pain doesn't need to take over your life, but it also doesn't need to be ignored. It's a signal that something needs to change. Instead of getting stuck in the feeling, you start using that energy in a better way. That means doing small things with focus, cleaning your space, planning your day, getting back into your routine. You take the time and attention you were giving to someone else, and you use it to take care of yourself. You're not trying to look strong or prove anything to anyone. You're just doing what works. Less overthinking, more action, less waiting, more moving forward. It's not about rushing into something new. It's about choosing not to waste more energy on something that already showed you it wasn't solid. You don't need to post about it. You don't need to explain it. You just shift your focus. You stay consistent. And slowly, things start to feel lighter. Because now, your energy is working for you, not against you. That's how you turn pain into progress. Quietly, clearly, and fully in control. And once your focus is back where it belongs, the eighth lesson becomes clear. Let distance do the talking. Once someone stops showing up with consistency, you don't chase clarity. They already gave you the answer through their actions. Changes in tone, reduced effort, lack of follow-through. These are not mixed signals, they are clear signals. You don't need to confront or explain anything. Just adjust. Distance isn't emotional, it's a decision. If the energy isn't mutual, you step back. Not to prove a point, but to protect your time and focus. The gap you create becomes useful. It sets a standard. It filters out those who were only engaged when it was easy for them. You're not closing a door with resentment. You're closing it with precision. Let them deal with the absence they caused. Let them notice what they no longer have access to. No reminders, no long messages, no second chances by default. You're not being cold, you're being clear. Because when respect fades, distance is the answer. And this is where the 9th lesson becomes crucial. Exiting disrespect with grace. There comes a point where you have to stop measuring whether someone is intentionally disrespecting you and start paying attention to the simple fact that they are. When respect isn't present, or when it slowly erodes through subtle behaviors, disinterest, lack of consistency, small dismissals, you don't need to wait for something major to happen. The absence of basic consideration is already enough. Respect isn't something you negotiate. It's not something you earn through patience or repetition. It's a standard. Either it's there or it's not. And when it's not, your responsibility is not to educate the other person. It's to reposition yourself, quietly, effectively, without explanation. The decision to remove yourself from a dynamic where you're being overlooked is not a reaction, it's a recalibration. You don't leave with noise or bitterness. You simply stop giving your time, energy, or presence to situations where your presence has stopped being acknowledged with sincerity. Too often, people remain in spaces where they are barely tolerated, hoping that consistency will eventually lead to recognition. But that approach wears you down. The more you stay, the more you teach others that they can give less and still keep your attention. Over time, this dynamic creates a gap between your value and how it's being treated. And if you don't move, that gap becomes your new normal. You begin adjusting your expectations downward just to stay connected. You stop asking for what you need. You silence your instincts in the name of keeping the peace. But peace that costs you your self-respect is not peace, it's avoidance. And avoidance turns into resentment. That's why stepping away early, before you've drained yourself, isn't dramatic. It's efficient. It protects your mental clarity and prevents you from investing in something that clearly isn't investing back. You don't need to defend your decision. You don't owe an exit speech. The person who's made you feel unseen has already heard your silence. They just didn't respond to it. That's the whole point. You're not walking away because they made a mistake. You're walking away because they made it a pattern. No one needs to be warned that you're leaving when you were never fully received to begin with. You lift yourself from the dynamic with quiet precision, and in doing so, you communicate something much stronger than frustration, self-possession. You show that your time is not up for negotiation, that you don't offer your presence in exchange for crumbs, that you will not work harder to convince someone of your value than they're willing to work to meet it. This isn't about setting a boundary to prove something. It's about no longer giving chances to someone who's already told you, through their behavior, that they don't take you seriously. Respect is visible. It's expressed in tone, effort, and presence. And if you have to keep asking for it, you're in the wrong room. What's most powerful is the way you exit. No tension, no emotional scene. Just the clear, collected choice to stop participating. When you no longer push for validation, you take away the leverage people had over you. Your silence isn't an emotional tactic. It's a boundary in action. You don't withhold anything. You simply stop giving where it isn't honored. And in that decision, you restore balance. You reclaim the energy that was slowly leaking through lowered standards. You remind yourself, without needing to prove it to anyone else, that your value remains intact, especially in the face of disregard. Once you've removed yourself from spaces where you're not respected, the next step is refinement. Lesson 10 is about precision through paring back. There's a limit to how much presence people can truly appreciate. When you're constantly available, endlessly explaining, and always ready to respond, You become part of the background, familiar, predictable, easy to overlook. What once felt meaningful starts to feel expected, and what's expected rarely gets valued. This doesn't mean you should become distant or performative. The more intentional you are with your energy, the more visible its impact becomes. People don't respect what they can consume endlessly without effort. So you cut the excess, not to punish, but to reset the balance. Start with how often you engage. If your attention is always immediate, always full, always guaranteed, others will begin to treat it like an unlimited resource. And what's unlimited becomes invisible. You're not disappearing. You're choosing where your energy lands and why. Next, reevaluate how much you expect from others. Expecting less isn't about lowering your standards. It's about being realistic. You don't invest more than someone is willing to meet. You observe. You adjust. If there's inconsistency, you don't react. You reduce your input accordingly. That's not detachment. That's precision. Need less. That's the final shift. Not because you don't care, but because you've stopped attaching your emotional well-being to other people's responses. You stop relying on their engagement to validate your direction. Instead of waiting for someone to notice your effort, you notice where your energy flows naturally, and you focus there. None of this requires an announcement. You don't need to explain that you're showing less or expecting less. You simply live it. You let your actions speak. That shift in rhythm is more noticeable than anything you could say out loud, and those who pay attention will adjust. Those who don't were never aligned with your pace in the first place. Boundaries at this point stop being theoretical. They become visible. Your presence becomes clearer, not louder, more focused, not more frequent. You're not seeking attention. You're showing what matters by where you place your effort. People recognize this shift, not because you told them, but because the energy they once took for granted now moves differently. This approach is sustainable. It doesn't rely on emotional highs or complicated strategies. It's about making your presence meaningful by not scattering it. When you're consistent with this, your presence gains weight. It lands, it stays, and it's respected. In the end, paring back isn't about doing less for the sake of it. It's about becoming sharper, more centered, and harder to misread. It's a return to focus. You stop over-functioning. You stop over-explaining. You let things unfold without trying to fill every gap. You create space for others to rise or fall based on how they respond to a more grounded version of you. This is what clarity looks like in motion, not loud, not reactive, just focused. Once you've refined your presence and stopped overextending yourself, the next step is just as critical. Resisting the pull to return to what already cost you your balance. That brings us to lesson 11. Don't revisit what you had to recover from. Not every reconnection deserves a second chance. Time apart doesn't automatically mean transformation, and emotional distance doesn't guarantee personal growth. Sometimes people return, not because they've changed, but because they expect the door to still be open. That expectation often rests on your past willingness to overlook patterns you've since outgrown. True healing isn't about leaving the door ajar for anyone who decides to come back. It's about remembering what it took to rebuild your peace after they left. The sleepless nights, the self-doubt, the effort it took to regain clarity. None of that should be forgotten just because someone reappears with softer words or a more composed tone. Even if someone returns more aware or more willing, that doesn't erase the cost of what you had to repair. You can forgive someone without giving them access. You can wish them well without making space for them again. Boundaries don't mean resentment. They mean remembering the difference between growth and repetition. If they want another chance, they need to meet you where you are now, not where you used to be. And if they're not prepared to do that, you're not the one walking away. You're simply choosing not to go backward. That's not being closed off. That's being clear. After you've stopped responding to old patterns, a different kind of clarity begins to take shape. It's no longer just about removing what drains you. It's about protecting your energy even in the subtle details. This leads us to lesson 12. Be kind but unavailable. There's a difference between being cold and being selective. You don't need to shut down emotionally to protect your peace. You just need to be more intentional about where your attention goes. Kindness doesn't mean open access. It means you treat people with respect, but you no longer offer your time, energy, or emotional presence to anyone who hasn't earned it. Emotional maturity is knowing you can be calm, polite, and even warm, while still keeping your distance. You can respond with grace and still maintain strong boundaries. Just because you've healed doesn't mean others get automatic entry. Growth doesn't erase the standard you've built, it reinforces it. Some people believe that kindness means availability, but being kind isn't the same as being accessible. Your empathy isn't a pass. Your warmth isn't a guarantee. The energy you use to hand out freely is now applied with precision and only where it has purpose. You don't have to explain this shift. You don't need to justify being more selective. The way you carry yourself says enough. You're not operating from fear or bitterness. You're simply not entertaining cycles that have already shown you their outcome. You've learned that protecting your peace doesn't require defensiveness. It just requires clarity. Kindness stays, but access doesn't. And from here forward, those are two separate things. Once you've learned to protect your energy with clarity and calm, there's one final shift that completes the process. It's not about how you respond to others, but about what you no longer carry for them. This is lesson 13. Let them feel what you protected them from. In many situations, you weren't just present, you were absorbing. You filtered tension, managed mood swings, filled emotional gaps, and kept things stable without anyone asking how much it cost you to hold it all together. That quiet effort often went unnoticed, not because it wasn't valuable, but because it made everything easier for them. Now that you've stepped back, there's no more buffering. The weight they never felt begins to settle. The discomfort they used to offload onto you no longer has a place to land. It's simply what happens when you stop taking responsibility for what was never yours. You're not trying to make them regret anything. You're just no longer willing to carry the emotional balance of a relationship alone. The silence they experience now is the one you used to fill with reassurance, patience, and emotional labor. This isn't about proving a point. It's about allowing reality to take shape without your intervention. They'll feel the shift, not because you forced it, but because you stopped managing what they never appreciated. You're no longer the shield. You're no longer the translator. You're no longer absorbing the impact. And that clarity, more than anything else, is the final step in regaining your full presence. If these insights resonated with you, consider subscribing for more. And if you'd like to support this work, leaving a super thanks makes a real difference. Thank you for watching and for choosing yourself.